Well, greetings and salutations, and welcome once again to the Newsman Weekly Podcast. Episode number, drumroll, 28. Happy New Year to all of you. We took last week off here at the podcast. Happy to be back with you today. Thanks once again to local country singer Luke Watson for crafting this show's theme song. Appreciate it very much. Ran into Luke over the holidays and thanked him in person for letting us use his song. And very nice young man.
I forgot we ran into him at the Red Fox.
Yes, we did indeed. Hey, folks, we all made it to 2025, so let's get busy. It's going to be another busy damn year. We got no time to waste. But I got to be honest with you from the jump. I never imagined being here, Earth, in 2025. In March, I'm scheduled, notice I didn't say I will, I'm scheduled to turn 64 years old. I used to really like that Beatles song about 64. Not so much now. Anyway, today I'm once again joined by Zac Hiser, the executive producer of the Newsman Weekly. Welcome back, Zac. How the hell was your holiday? The way you were describing it before we started the show, it sounds quite provocative.
I was just a complete lazy degenerate for 2 weeks off work and eating a lot and doing a little drinking and... No, it was really nice. It was good to spend time with the family, and it was good to get a nice to have a break.
So how would we differentiate those 2 weeks from the 2 weeks prior?
Oh, right. Well, I guess just the only difference is I wasn't working, so and sleeping a little bit more.
Gotcha. Also back with us today is Knox Page's reporter Grant Ritchey, our show's official videographer, who took roughly 2 hours to set up 2 cameras today. So, Ritchie, was it sparkling grape juice again for you on midnight New Year's Eve?
No, I actually had some real champagne.
Ooh.
Let's
what
see.
kind? What kind did you have?
Oh man, don't ask me the brand. I got
Bartles and James.
I got from Kroger. It has like
so many.
Yeah,
Kroger champagne.
Kroger. There's way too many brands of Prosecco. It all tastes
Yeah.
pretty similar. Yep.
I haven't really talked to you since Christmas. How was making homemade pizza with your grandma?
it
on Christmas
was
Eve?
really peaceful. We had like the works where you just have like a bunch of different toppings on it, and yeah, it was pretty good.
All right. Well, shout out.
That was
to
what
Grandma.
you did for New Year's Eve?
No, that was Christmas.
That was
yeah,
Christmas.
Yeah, that's
I
what I did
remember
with Christmas.
The last time we were all together, he explained to us his rocking plans for
That's
Christmas
right.
Eve was pizza making with Grandma. So.
Yeah.
Hey, that's adorable.
Thank you.
It is.
The ladies love that type of stuff, too.
Yeah.
Homemade pizza, lavender. He's got it all going for him.
Yep, he really does.
No doubt about it. Hey, we're also joined by Hayden Gray, Richland source Shelby, and North County reporter. Hayden, did you even make it to midnight on New Year's Eve?
I did this year. I didn't know if I would this year, but my 14-month-old was conveniently in the middle of kind of a sleep regression cycle during that week. So
wait. Did you say sleep regression cycle in reference to a 14-month-old?
I mean, whatever they want to call it nowadays, whatever the trends are.
Sleep regression.
What'd they call
cycle.
that when you had little babies?
Get your butt in bed and lay there.
So yeah, I mean, he 2 a.m. was his desired bedtime. So yeah, we did make it.
You do know who the adult is, right? And if you really want him to go to bed, he can go to bed.
Yeah.
You can't really do that with a 1-year-old.
No, right.
You can't just be like,
Hey,
listen,
Hey, go to bed.
I raised
pull
three.
yourself up by your bootstraps.
I raised 3 of them, and hell yes, you can. And maybe that's why they're all scarred today. All right, folks, in the news business, life throws you curveballs on a regular basis, and you got to be able to adapt and think on your feet or somebody else's feet. That's what we're dealing with here today on the Newsman Weekly Podcast. We had planned and scheduled to have Mansfield Police Chief Jason Bauman, Detective Terry Butler, and DNA expert Don Fryback as our guests to talk about how a 43-year-old murder case was recently solved, the 1981 homicide of 18-year-old Deborah Miller. If you remember or you read Richland Source, if you remember, I wrote about this on December 30th in Richland Source. And if you're not a member, why the hell aren't you? I'll just say that right now. But due to some inclement weather and scheduling issues, our guest couldn't be with us today. I talked to the police chief this morning, and we're going to try again for next week.
That'll be. I missed that story in my holiday days. Well, I saw the headline, but
Yeah,
I was too fat and lazy to read the story.
Headline reader.
You were too lazy to click a button.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Good God, that's lazy.
Couldn't even move my fingers. I was so full after a Christmas feast.
Daddy, can we go sledding? No.
Can't move my
Go
finger.
back to bed.
You were in a sleep regression cycle.
I did build a snowman with the children.
Okay.
Did you?
Yeah.
How'd that turn out?
It's still standing.
Is it?
Yeah.
All right. Well, the snow we got overnight will not be good snow. It's really dry.
You're right.
Yeah.
Very
But yeah,
powdery.
I wrote a story yesterday afternoon about the white death from above, Snowmageddon, that everybody was going to get. And I pointed out that we weren't really going to get it. Most of it was going far south of us. That story blew up on our website. It had like 21,000 page views as of this morning.
And you were right.
But you know what? We did get an inch, maybe. I scraped a little bit of snow off my patio this morning. And then I went inside and looked and was amazed at every school district that was scheduled to be open today was either on a 2-hour delay or was closed. And I said to myself, back in my day, we walked uphill in the snow
there it is.
and home, both ways.
Hayden remembers a
Yeah.
time when there was a lot more snow than there is now.
Yeah,
he's,
back in the
he's
battle
26
days.
now, so back in the
Yeah.
Obama administration when he was a boy.
Yeah, back in the battle days of 2016.
Mhm.
Richie,
No,
what's
I have
the-
no
Richie,
further
what's the
comment.
worst snow you can ever remember as a child?
I think it was like in the early 2000s. When
Early 2000s.
I think we had a pretty big snowstorm. I just remember because we didn't have power for a couple of days, and
Ooh.
my uncle had to come with and clear our driveway because we literally could not leave our house. So, but
How
I'll try
old
to
were
remember
you?
the date. Oh, geez, I had to be like 5 or 6 or something.
You couldn't leave your house.
No.
A snow shovel didn't fit your hands.
No.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I don't know. It was
It
all
was
snow.
cold.
Yeah, it was cold. Very
It
cold.
is funny. I feel like whenever there's a warning of a big snow, like the schools are like, we're gonna close.
Yep.
It's the day out. It's the,
Predetermined.
coming back from the holiday. They already made it up in their mind. We could have gotten 0 inches, and they would have been like, "Yeah, we were supposed to have a big storm, so
Yeah.
we're not."
Well,
We're not going in, which is fine. No shade to the teachers or schools.
Oh,
you know,
sure.
we-
Yeah. Well, I think that all
Love not to work.
changed when they changed the snow days law. Back in the day, you had 5 hard snow days a year or inclement weather. And if you took more than those 5 days, those days had to be made up. 1978, when I was a junior in high school down in southeast Ohio, we had the blizzard of 78 in early January.
We've heard about it.
Yeah, and our school was closed for probably 3.5 weeks, and we were going to school until the end of June. The only people that were really happy were the seniors because they still graduated on time and missed that last month that we had to go.
Were you a senior?
I was a junior and
Oh,
said
okay.
this was January of 78.
I think maybe that's just kind of what you deserved after all those hard times in elementary school and the brutal cold of Georgia.
Yes, well, yeah, we you have to understand.
I'm not
when-
letting you. Yeah.
You have to understand when it snows in Georgia like we had today,
Mm-hmm.
Atlanta
Right, yeah.
closes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
would you-
Texas, yeah.
Yeah, we don't.
They're
we-
not. They don't have this equipment.
Well, you probably had a bigger blade on your boyhood lawnmower snowplow than they have in Fulton County. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
All right. Anyway, instead of doing those interviews and having those guests today, we're going to spend some time digging into another local news topic, and that is the story that dominated our news headlines last week: the New Year's morning bombing of a Tesla Cybertruck outside the Las Vegas Trump International Hotel.
Wait, I thought you said local news.
It is local.
Oh,
And I'm going to
tell
tell
me
you
how.
I'm going to tell you how we found out. The bombing happened on a Wednesday morning, which was a holiday for all of us, or most of us anyway. But it didn't take long on Thursday, when I got back in the office, for social and traditional media to begin to spread the word about a potential local connection to that story. The story was that the man who blew up the truck was a former North Central Ohio resident. A story was published by several newspaper websites about that connection. Some folks who work in Source Brand Solutions alerted us in our newsroom Slack channel about that story. So I looked at it, and it said the man, Matthew Livelsberger, had graduated from Ontario High School and also Bucyrus High School. I'm not sure how the reporter justified having both of that in the story, but hey, But both of those things can't be true. But sometimes when you've got breaking news, this is kind of the way it goes. We didn't have a lot of people working in the newsroom on Thursday, including Hayden or Grant or Zach, or any of you. So I decided to dig in myself. I contacted some people I know at Ontario schools. I quickly found out Livelsberger did not graduate from Ontario High School, but folks I talked to there seemed to believe that they remembered him at Bucyrus as an athlete.
And you got a hold of people at Ontario on January 2nd?
Yes, I did.
That's good.
Well, Larry Phillips, our managing editor,
doors.
gave me his cell phone number.
Okay.
Because trust me, you can't get anybody to answer
Right.
the phone at the school.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, I tried then contacting Bucyrus schools, but all I had was office numbers, and guess what? Nobody was working. So I said, you know what? I'll just call the Bucyrus Police Department. And my thinking was, if he actually is from Bucyrus, maybe authorities have contacted them in some way. Maybe they know something. Maybe they'd heard from authorities, and maybe I'd get somebody that might even just remember him.
Couldn't you just go to look at the yearbook?
Where was I going to go find a Bucyrus?
Going to break in Bucyrus High School.
2005.
In the archives.
If I had to, but
I know. I'm just giving you shit. Sorry.
I'm taking the path of least resistance. Okay, it's the day after New Year's.
All right, keep going. Keep going.
Anyway, I got lucky. I called Bucyrus police. Person answered the phone. I asked, "What can you tell me about a gentleman named Matthew Livelsberger?" And she said, "What do you want to know?" And from a reporter standpoint, that's gold.
Yeah.
She quickly confirmed that he graduated from Bucyrus High School in 2005, and then he joined the U.S. Army shortly thereafter. We were off and running. Even though I didn't go to Bucyrus to look at the high school yearbook, as Mr. Hiser suggested, it is
It's not a bad idea, though.
Well, if I hadn't got something, eventually I would have had to drive to Bucyrus, if for no other reason than to go visit Baker's Pizza. Yeah. But it's about a 2,000-mile drive from Mansfield to Las Vegas, so boots on the ground reporting there was impossible. What I could do was use credible news reports. I'm emphasizing the word credible because there were some incredible alleged news reports over the weekend, lots of them. I began to read and piece together what had happened. Over the next 72 hours, I wrote 3 stories, each one with some more detail about Livelsberger and what led to the explosion outside the Las Vegas hotel. Here's part of what that third and final story, at least to date, told you. Matthew Livelsberger, who defended his country as a U.S. Army Green Beret for 2 decades, suffered from pain and exhaustion at the end and was also critical of his own nation's government, at least those leading that government. The 37-year-old Bucyrus High School graduate left behind notes describing those feelings when he shot himself in the head and blew up the truck with a crudely made bomb in front of the Las Vegas Trump International Hotel. Here's some things he wrote that investigators found. Quote, "This was not a terrorist attack. It was a wake-up call. Americans only pay attention to spectacles and violence. What better way to get my point across than a stunt with fireworks and explosives?" He put that on a cell phone notes app. There was another letter that recovered by police. He wrote imploring fellow service members, veterans, and all Americans to, all caps here, wake up. We're being led by weak and feckless leadership who only serve to enrich themselves. We're the United States of America, the best country people to ever exist. But right now we're terminally ill and headed toward collapse. And they also found a note that he wrote before the incident that seemed to indicate some struggles going on, perhaps in his own mind. Quote, "Why did I personally do it now? I needed to cleanse my mind of the brothers I've lost and relieve myself of the burden of the lives I took." Livelsberger was an active duty master sergeant, served 19 years in the U.S. Army as a Special Forces operator. He joined in 2006 after graduating in 2005, and he went in as, I believe they called it an 18X is what the Army calls it. That's where you can apply to become a Special Forces, in this case Green Beret, without any prior military experience. He was accepted into the program, and I'm not sure how long it took him. It usually takes anywhere from 18 months to 2 years to actually become a full-fledged Green Beret in the U.S. Army.
So this dude would you say he was like a highly decorated?
Yeah, he was an amazingly decorated member of the United States military. This is a guy who I think 25 medals, 5 ribbons. Probably the most impressive thing from a military standpoint, he earned 5 Bronze Stars. One of them had a Valor device for courage under fire. You only get that if you've demonstrated heroism in combat. This is a guy who did and saw many things over 2 decades of service. I know he had at least 2 or 3 deployments to Afghanistan. He was in Ukraine. I'm going to mispronounce this. Tajikistan, Georgia, the Congo. If there was some place around the world that U.S. Special Forces were being sent over the last 19 years, this is a guy who would have been there. But it certainly seems like when you read through the stories and you see the things, there was an ex-girlfriend who talked about meeting him back in 2018. She had been an Army nurse who I believe had been stationed in Germany, where she worked with some of the most injured and wounded military members coming out of the Middle East. And she talked about, she was fairly certain that he had suffered some traumatic brain injuries, post-traumatic stress disorder, that there were just things going on with him. And if you look at what Special Forces members do, it did not come as a surprise to me when you see that. If this was a suicide, and by all credible news reports it was, I did some looking. In 2023, 523 members of the U.S. Armed Forces died by suicide, according to the Defense Department. Excuse me. That is more than the previous year when there was 493. The total force rate of suicide deaths per 100,000 service members was 9% higher than in 2022. I think one of the first military suicides I ever wrote about was 2006. I was at the Mansfield News Journal, and there was a Marine major named Michael Stover who had just been redeployed back to Iraq for a second time, was going through some personal issues with his spouse, much like it sounded from things I've read that Livelsberger had experienced anyway. And Michael Stover was, I talked to his brother, I talked to his sister. I'd never met Michael, but I felt like I did know him just by talking with them. This was a Marine's Marine. This was a guy who grew up wanting to do all of the things in the Marine Corps that he was doing. Unfortunately for Michael, those problems caught up with him, and he ended up taking his own life during that second tour in Iraq. So that was one of the things his brother Edward told me, and I looked up this quote. I think, unfortunately, today a lot of the values he had, the integrity, the devotion to his job, it's hard to find somebody who understands that. I don't think people back home understand. Everyone talks about the ultimate sacrifices, but they don't understand the little sacrifices. They don't understand what it's like for a soldier to not be there for a child's birthday, for the holidays, for their parents' illnesses, as well as their parents' deaths. His brother was also was an Air Force veteran, so he had some idea of what he was talking about. Edward told me, I think there was a tug of war between the Marine Corps, which he grew to love, and the responsibilities of duty, honor, and country that he couldn't give up, and his desire for a family and the loss of a family that he wanted so deeply. So he had decided to retire. He told his commanding officer that he wanted to stick that deployment out. Ultimately, he sent an email. He wrote one last letter because he stopped communicating with his brother and sister. He sent one last letter asking his brother to take care of his dog, telling his family where his assets and his lockers were, and decided to end his life there. So, military suicide is something that doesn't get talked about enough.
Right.
And there's no doubt in my mind, based upon what I've seen and read since this happened, that Matthew Livelsberger was something just like that.
Yeah, and often it's not just like dropouts or people that it's very successful individuals that deal with this.
Well, you don't get to be where he was without that kind of focus and hard work. And you know what? We've got some more to unpack about this incident, but let's take a break for a moment. Stay with us if you would. Well, welcome back, folks, to the Newsman Weekly. As we said earlier, I'm joined by Source Media staffers Zac Hiser, Grant Ritchey, and Hayden Gray. We're spending today's show talking about the Tesla Cybertruck bombing in Las Vegas that happened on New Year's morning, which was triggered by Bucyrus High School graduate Matthew Livelsberger, a U.S. Army Green Beret. And Zac, you were talking during the break to me about some stuff you heard over the weekend, some podcasts and things.
Well, I was curious if any of you guys had watched or listened to the Sean Ryan podcast with the former intelligence officer he had on and some of the allegations and the emails that were sent. I don't know if Hunnell did you listen to it?
I did.
Okay. So can you give the listeners a Cliff Notes version of what they're alleging?
Well, let me start by saying I'm disappointed that guys who spent their careers, Ryan, I believe it was a Navy SEAL. Mm-hmm. Is it
Sam Shoemate?
Sam Shoemate was a intelligence officer, which in military dialogue is an oxymoron. I'm disappointed that guys who spent their careers doing things the right way now spend their time speculating and talking about things that may not do anybody any good because there's no real actual proof of anything yet. Ryan's guest, and I'm going to keep forgetting his name.
Sean Ryan's guest, Sam Shoemate. Yeah.
Sam Shoemate said that he got an email from Matthew Livelsberger leading up to the bombing, in which he described he wanted to, that he knew things about the drones that have been flying off the East Coast, how those actually worked. I believe he talked about anti-gravity and how these things are working, because Livelsberger's last duty station was in Germany, and it sounds like he was working with drones. Mm-hmm. I don't know what he was doing with those drones, but he was basically alerting Shoemate, did I get the name right?
Yep.
Shoemate, about how all this was happening, and that the United States and China were the only countries that had this kind of anti-gravity technology. And he was cautioning him that, you know, these are things he needed to tell somebody, and he wanted to be on Fox News. He wanted to be on
Joe Rogan.
He wanted to maybe talk to the incoming Secretary of Defense. And then he also talked about an incident in Afghanistan in 2019 in which he claimed he helped cite attacks or bombings that killed civilians, and he wanted to talk about that as well.
Right, alleged war crimes in Afghanistan. And that was 2019, you said?
Yes, 2019.
Okay. You know? So you're saying, so basically, this is all speculation.
Yes.
But, and Sam Shoemate, who got this email from Livelsberger, did not publish or release this email. They
did after the show.
They did, so it's out there. So
they called
how
it
is that speculation then? If it's, or is it, do you think he's faking it? Do you think they're just making this all up?
First of all, I don't think anyone spent nearly enough time yet to make sure this was actually an email from Matthew Livelsberger.
True.
I mean, that would, as a reporter, that's the first thing you do, is where did this actually come from? And they showed a bunch of coding, and I'm not that familiar with what scripts and what coding goes into a military email. You know, it looks on face value like it is, but I don't know.
Well, and it's so easy to easily manipulate stuff now. It's hard with technology. You can make something look very believable.
You know, one of the things Shoemate said during the show is he believes that Livelsberger is still alive, and that he perhaps used a Tesla Cybertruck because it could drive itself. and that there was a body inside that truck, and he had it driven or programmed it to drive in front of the hotel and to explode,
Right.
and that he is still alive. But then within 24 hours, Shoemate was on X on a different podcast saying, I don't think
Maybe
I
not.
was, yeah. So,
Well,
I mean,
but it's a lot of this is, to be fair, it's all unfolding. And if he really did get an email or what, I mean, he's kind of, the story is changing because things are unfolding. But the reason he said he was still alive, right, was because Signal, which is an encrypted messaging app, like his Signal number or
That's
whatever
right,
changed after. So
Right.
someone was messing around with it or it didn't happen. I mean, who knows what happened, but
well, see, my problem is in this business, and I know that Shoemate and Ryan are not, quote
Journalists,
unquote,
yeah.
professional journalists. You get emails all the time. You get letters dropped off all the time. You don't just suddenly publish them
yeah.
and say, here's here's what we're hearing. I mean, that is just, I think it's reckless.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, see, I've even got Richie.
There's Richie.
So, okay, I don't disagree with you on that, but let's give him the benefit of the doubt and say maybe some of this that doesn't mean that it's not true just because it's reckless, right?
I think it's reckless to the point of dangerous.
Yeah.
Because there's so many conspiracy theorists out there. When we published our last story, our most recent story on this, the social media comments that fly in, they're immediately linking to Ryan's podcast.
Right.
Oh, I don't trust the government. I don't. You know what? I'm not a big advocate of the government at any level, federal, state, or local. Okay, I don't necessarily trust it. But at the same time, if all you've got is some email and some speculation and conspiracy theories, no, that's not the way this business ought to operate.
For sure. Yeah, and I'm not trying to be journalistic here. I'm just trying to talk and figure out where the truth may lie, and we probably won't ever know, but it is I mean, we got to admit, like, it's 2025 now. The world's gotten a lot. The things we thought we knew in, like, when Hayden was a boy in 2016, 17,
When it was really
18,
snowing and he had to plow with his
Right.
lawnmower. Yeah.
Right, but the things we thought we knew about the world, like, have kind of been turned on their head. And so and that makes it even more dangerous probably for conspiracy theories to come out about things. But the reality is that, the government does lie and there are a lot of secrets. And
without a doubt. But
to me, my war crimes aside, like, what the hell is anti-gravity? And is that a thing? I mean,
I don't know.
It kind of, if you are looking at different, conspiracy theories or different things online about, for example, another one is, and I'm not trying to go down a rabbit hole, but remember that Malaysian plane that disappeared in 2014 and they never figured it out? And then there was that video, which, like, they said was a fake, but of, like, the orbs circling this plane. Like, apparently that was some sort of anti-gravity technology that only the U.S. and China had, and it was a show of force from the U.S. This is all conspiracy speculation. I'm not reporting anything, but obviously, but it is interesting. Like, I don't know if the world's just getting weirder or more wrong, or we're getting closer to find out some truth. That's the frustrating part, is, like, are we being led more astray, or are we actually getting somewhere?
That I can't tell you. I can tell you in his email, which was labeled a manifesto, Livelsberger warned that the drones spotted across the East Coast last year pose, quote, the most dangerous threat to national security that has ever existed.
Lovely.
The email warned that drones are from China and, quote, basically have an unlimited payload capacity and they can park it over the White House if they wanted. It's checkmate.
Richie?
Well, listen, I was just thinking, like, even if you're not a journalist, don't you have a responsibility for your audience and not just be saying things that aren't, like, credibly true because people are listening to you for a reason, right?
No, because what I'm just we're speculating right now.
Heiser has no responsibility to
right,
anybody
right.
or anything.
Listen, people talk now. I mean, there's no, like, the gatekeeping of, like, I mean, people are just going to people have podcasts and they talk. That's where all this. We just had a presidential election that was like won because of podcast interviews. I mean, on both sides, like they weren't going to journalists, they were going to podcasters that don't have the same code of ethics, and so I don't know.
Well, they should. That's why.
Yeah, the phrase that he used or allegedly used in his email wasn't anti-gravity. It was gravitic propulsion.
Propulsion.
So I looked that
It's a
up.
made-up word.
And according to sportskita.com, which does definitions of pop culture news, it's a spacecraft having a triangular hull with vertical electrostatic line charges on each corner that produce a horizontal electric field parallel to the sides of the hull. So that's what he said or allegedly said in this email, claiming that he had seen or was seeing or knew about that was operating off the East Coast. I'm not going to spend a lot more time speculating about that manifesto. I'm going to treat it journalistically and as it's investigated and investigators continue their work. But I thought what I wanted to do was focus on what we do know about Master Sergeant Livelsberger. This guy was a warrior for his country for nearly 2 decades. He served all over the world. The fact is that over the last 20 years or so, the operational tempo of U.S. Special Forces has been significantly high. Ever since the 9/11 incident or the terror attacks in New York City, and the war on terror began, special forces have had a sustained and frequent deployment rates across various global regions. Things like Army Green Beret, U.S. Navy SEAL teams, Delta Force operators, if such a thing actually exists. The Army doesn't like to even talk about Delta Force. But basically it means these guys are continuously cycling in and out of missions, very limited rest time for recovery, high ops tempo, little downtime. And when you go to places where they go and you do the things that they do, even in training, I mean, Special Forces guys do training that would kill anybody in this room.
Oh, yeah, easily.
I mean, these guys do things just in practice that would put us away. Special Forces people have seen and done shit that none of us back home could ever comprehend, and they do it over and over and over again. These are special guys. I interviewed a couple of Navy SEALs when I was in the Navy Reserve down in Puerto Rico. They're trained to do everything they do in all kinds of crazy environments. One SEAL slogan that I heard repeatedly was, you got to get comfortable being uncomfortable. If you've ever watched for example, any SEAL team training or SEAL team courses when they're becoming SEALs, and they're at Coronado Beach, and they basically go lay in the ocean.
That's right, yeah.
Get sandy and get wet. And the water is cold most of the time there when they're doing this, and you just lay there. And you just take it. And you get comfortable being uncomfortable. It's the same way with Green Berets. It takes 18 months to 2 years to become a Green Beret. It's even similar for SEALs. There's so much physical work, mental work. Then they get into things like search and rescues, evasion if you get captured, just language courses they take because they do go all over the world, so they got to be able to speak different languages. In unconventional warfare, small unit tactics, survival. I mean, it is a brutal business, and Matthew Livelsberger did it for 2 decades.
Well, and to bring up a point that Zach brought up earlier too, like I feel like from everything that, like you said, that has been learned about him and everything that we do know, I think it really hammers hard on the fact that that the stigma that people that commit suicide are weak mentally or physically or a combination of both. I mean, I think that just simply kind of proves against the contrary here, that even the most, I mean, I can't imagine the physical and mental hell this guy put himself through to have the career that he did. So I think sometimes that there is still too much of a stigma, right, that these people are weak. But he obviously showed that even these guys can deal with very difficult things that you just can't overcome.
Well, there was a story in the New York Times where the reporter spoke to Alicia Errett. She had a relationship with Matthew back in 2018. She was the one who was the Army nurse who worked with combat veterans who had brain injuries. Matt was in the Army's 10 Special Forces group in his last command. She said he was forgetting words, losing his train of thought mid-sentence, struggling with insomnia. He had headaches and depressive moods that sometimes kept him shut away for days. In a text exchange after they started dating, he mentioned being deployed 3 times in 3 years. She asked him if he'd been hurt. His response was, quote, just some concussions. I mean, she said, I think he wanted to get help, but he thought if he said anything, he wouldn't be able to do his job anymore. And based upon what I do know about the military, he's probably right. By the time they met, he'd been in the Army for more than a decade, been deployed into combat a number of times, spent years jumping from airplanes, exposed to weapons blasts in training, back injuries from hard parachute landings, lost some of his hearing from being around explosions and gunfire. The Army, in a statement after the New York Times article published, said that in typical Army speak, the Sergeant Livelsberger had access to programs provided for mental health and did not display any concerning behaviors at the time. In other words, don't blame us, which is something that is not unexpected for the Army or any military leadership. Despite his troubles, Errett said Livelsberger was kind, funny, and intelligent. He liked to hike, camp, and play with her dogs. Said there was nothing in his talk or in his actions that had suggested he was inclined to carry out an act like the one outside the hotel. She said, quote, he was really just a really loving guy with a deep well of integrity. Doesn't seem to be any doubt at this point that Matthew was suffering from the wear and tear of 2 decades of doing what he did, whether that's post-traumatic stress disorder, the physical injuries, all those things rolled into one. I just think that, when I weigh the possibility as a email speculation with some podcasters or what we know about this guy and actually reporters talking to people who know him, who knew him, and them describing what they knew, I think I give far more credence to the published credible news reports that probably led him to the decision to take his own life and create a spectacle. And it's interesting because one of the first things I saw was the ATF agent who said this was a really crude bomb, and we would have expected a higher level of bomb-making expertise from somebody with his background. I mean, he used like propane tanks and fuel tanks, gas cans. I don't think, and he also chose a Tesla, thank you, a Tesla Cybertruck, a steel-walled vehicle. I don't think his intention was to hurt anybody.
Right.
Because he made this crude bomb. If he really wanted to make a bomb, he could have blown.
And you would have gone to a crowded area or something.
He could have blown up the hotel if he wanted to. Mm-hmm. This is a guy who knew how to do that. Our country taught him how to kill people.
Right.
So if that was his intention, he could have done it. I think that's why I tend to believe the notes that were found on his phone, he's trying to, I think, get a message across. And maybe that message is, hey, military, hey, people in the United States, pay more attention to your war fighters, to the people who are doing this, who are serving you around the world. Let's find a way to take better care of them because look what's happened to me kind of thing.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it definitely could be all of the above, none of the above, one of the above. I mean, there's no evidence of his plain intentions and what he saw and what he witnessed and here's why I'm doing this, right? There's kind of his manifesto and his notes app, but I don't know. Hayden, what were you going to say?
No, yeah. I mean, I was just going to add, in the notes app, if that certainly is indeed his own words. I mean, he said it himself. Americans only pay attention to spectacles and violence. Well,
Right.
this certainly created that spectacle and stuff. And if he did have a clear message, you brought up all those staggering statistics. How many, former members of the armed forces, their suicides, go unheard of. And I'm not saying that every single one is going to be a nationwide viral story, but how many brothers and sisters does he have to go through what he's gone through and lose, and we'll never know. So maybe this was supposed to be different.
Well, there was, I don't know if any of you have ever watched the HBO series called The Pacific,
I've heard of it,
which follows Marines in the Pacific during World War II. I had read a book by a Marine named Eugene Sledge, who was part of, or one of the focuses of that series. And Sledge had written a book called With the Old Breed at Paleolu in Okinawa about his service there. He was not Special Forces. He was just a Marine. I think he was part of a mortar squad. But he saw and experienced horrible, grievous, just loss of civilians, especially on Okinawa during those fights, those battles. It was not unusual to spend 30, 40, 50 days taking one of these islands because the Japanese forces did not want to give them up, especially when you get to places like Okinawa, which is not far from the mainland. But one of the things that Sledge points out, his father was a physician, and Eugene wanted to join the Marines, but his dad heard a heart murmur and didn't want to let him go. Ultimately, the murmur went away, and Sledge quickly enlisted. The thing his physician father told him was, look, I treated lots of veterans after World War I. I'm not worried about wounds of the flesh and broken bones, things like that. All that stuff heals. He says, what I don't want to see, he goes, well, I saw soldiers who when I looked in their eyes, the light was gone. There was no life left in their eyes. And he said, I don't want to see that for you. And it took a while. When Sledge survived, ended up coming home, it took a while for him. He ultimately became a biology professor and taught for many years. But when he returned home, it was very difficult for him to reacclimate and get over the things that he saw and did while he was fighting with the Marines in the Pacific. So I would highly recommend, I've got 3 or 4 books I want to suggest to people. That's one of them. Again, it's called With the Old Breed at Paleolu in Okinawa. Another was written by a Marine who fought in similar places called Helmet for My Pillow by a guy named Robert Leckie, who, when he came back, he returned to his career as a sports writer at the Bergen Record up in New Jersey. There's another book called Lone Survivor by Marcus Luttrell. He was a Navy SEAL, and that became a movie. There's another book called American Sniper, which was written by Chris Kyle, another Navy SEAL, also made into a movie. Ultimately, Chris Kyle, when he finally got back after many deployments and got out of the military, he was trying to work with veterans who were dealing with PTSD issues. And he was at a gun range with one of the young former, I think it was a Marine that he was working with, and the Marine turned his gun on him. So Chris Kyle died that way. There's another book called Scars and Stripes by Tim Kennedy. One of the interesting things I saw over the weekend, Tim Kennedy, has podcasts, he's in the news, he's an author, obviously, but Tim Kennedy is somebody who heard the stuff about Matthew Livelsberger, and it suddenly dawned on him, hey, I know that guy. And as it turns out, they had done a History Channel reality show together like 10 years ago. And they were 2 Green Berets, and they were going up against other special forces, doing different mission-type things, shooting and driving and rappelling and things like that. He goes, yeah, but the name he used in that show was Matt Berg. He goes, but yeah, I know that guy because he and Kennedy won that competition. So Kennedy knew him a little bit. obviously said he was a great Green Beret. I'm shocked at the way all this turned out. So yeah, it's called Scars and Stripes by Tim Kennedy.
It seems to be part of the problem too. I mean, just a special forces reality show, like this culture around these. I mean, I just don't think people take it seriously enough.
Well, there's a new
it's
one
just
getting
entertainment, like anything else.
There's a new one getting ready to start on Fox. I think it's the 3rd or 4th season, and it's called Special Forces: World's Toughest Test. And I think it's in their 3rd year, and they bring out like B-list celebrities.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And they have
Cam Newton's going to be on this coming season.
They have them do
Cam
things
Newton.
like fall down mountains and rappel, and it's taught by, for not only American special forces, but a couple of really cool guys from England who, SAS guys who put up with even less crap. And there's not much, they don't put up with much. But yeah, I think you're right. We've become infatuated with these guys, but at the same time, we've got to keep in mind that they're humans, and things break, and minds suffer, minds and bodies suffer. And I guess I want to close with this. It seems more and more clear that the military leaders in the country that Master Sergeant Livelsberger served have failed him, as they have many other soldiers. This nation owes a debt it can never repay to the men and women in uniform, especially those who serve in deployed positions overseas and in combat around the world. There are Green Berets, Navy SEALs, Delta Forces, and other special forces operating around the world today in dangerous missions and dangerous environments, even as we speak. These are tough people. You don't do what they do without being tough. But they are human, with all the frailties associated with being human. Okay, we're going to wrap up this discussion today on that note.
Well said.
Thank you. Thanks for being with us today on the Newsman Weekly. Be sure to join us next week for our interview with the Mansfield police officers who recently solved a 43-year-old murder mystery. I'll be back in a second to put a bow on this week's episode, but until then, remember what Mark Twain said. If you tell the truth, you don't have to remember anything.